Have you ever heard of an unbreakable bond between a man and a wild animal? Can an act of kindness from nature truly change a life? Today, we bring you an incredible story of a veteran who reunites with the bear that once saved his life. Their reunion is nothing short of unforgettable. What would you do if a wild bear saved your life? Would you recognize it years later? Watch till the end to find out how this heartwarming story unfolds. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to World of the Jungle for more amazing tales, and let us know in the comments. Do you believe animals remember those they help? James Walker, a seasoned Army veteran, found himself in a life-threatening situation in the vast, unforgiving wilderness during a covert mission deep in the mountains. As part of a special operations team, he had been deployed to monitor enemy activity in a remote area where communication signals were weak and the landscape was treacherous. The dense forest, combined with the unpredictable weather conditions, made the environment even more dangerous. One afternoon, while scouting through thick trees and rough terrain, James lost sight of his team. The dense fog rolled in quickly, obscuring his vision and creating a sense of confusion and isolation. He attempted to retrace his steps, but with each passing minute, he became more disoriented. The sound of the wind howling through the branches made it difficult to hear anything, and the terrain seemed endless. He called out for his team, but there was no response. Panic began to creep in as he realized he was completely alone, far from the safety of camp and any help. The temperature, which had been tolerable just hours before, began to plummet rapidly. As the cold air seeped into his bones, the situation became more critical. He searched desperately for any form of shelter, but the only thing he could find was a small patch of trees, which offered minimal protection. As darkness descended and the storm began to intensify, snow began to fall, covering the ground and making it even harder to see. James knew he had to find shelter soon, or he would freeze to death. The cold wind cut through his clothes and his body started to feel numb. His mind raced as he fought to stay conscious. Just when he thought he couldn't endure any longer, he collapsed against a tree, too weak to go on. It seemed like his fate was sealed. He was stranded in a freezing forest with no way out. Little did he know, something unexpected was about to happen that would alter the course of his life forever. In that moment of despair, when all hope seemed lost, he would encounter a presence that would save his life and remind him that help can come from the most unexpected places. In the midst of an unforgiving storm, deep within the forest, James Walker found himself battling nature's harshest elements. The wind howled, the snow fell thick and fast, and the temperature plummeted to dangerous lows. He had been separated from his unit during a mission and had wandered off the designated path in an attempt to find shelter. Now, as the storm raged on, the freezing cold seemed to seep into his bones, and his strength was quickly fading. Exhausted, cold, and disoriented, James stumbled through the snow-covered terrain, trying to stay alert despite his fatigue. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The wilderness around him, once so familiar, now felt like an alien world. He could barely make out the shapes of the trees in the swirling white, and his visibility was limited to only a few feet ahead. His body was on the brink of giving up, and he knew it would be only a matter of time before the cold would take him too. James's mind began to cloud with a sense of hopelessness. He had been trained to survive in extreme conditions, but this storm was unlike anything he had ever faced. Every attempt to find shelter was in vain, and as the night crept in, he realized he had lost any sense of direction. It was then that the unimaginable happened. Out of the darkness and snow, he saw a large, dark shape moving toward him. At first he thought it was a figment of his imagination, a trick played by his mind in his state of exhaustion. But as it drew closer, the shape became more defined. The outline of a massive brown bear emerged from the shadows. James froze, his heart pounding in his chest. In his disoriented state, he had no idea what to make of it. Fear was natural, but there was something in the way the bear moved that seemed different. Rather than attacking or growling, the bear stood there calmly, seemingly aware of James's distress. It sniffed the air for a moment, its large, powerful nose twitching, before it took a slow, deliberate step forward. The bear, an imposing creature, could have easily posed a threat, but instead, it moved closer to James, nudging him gently with its head, urging him to stay close. James, his survival instincts still intact despite the overwhelming fatigue, knew that he needed warmth. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and without shelter he would not last long. Slowly he sat down in the snow, unsure if the bear's presence was a gift or a threat. To his surprise, the bear did not leave. Instead, it lay down beside him, its thick fur offering a barrier from the biting cold wind. The warmth from the bear's body seeped into James, providing him with the heat he so desperately needed. The bear's body, large and muscular, radiated warmth like a living furnace. James, too tired to question why the bear was doing this, simply leaned into the warmth, allowing his body to relax for the first time in hours. The bear's presence was not just physical warmth, it was a sense of security, a silent promise of protection in the most terrifying of situations. As the storm continued to rage through the night, the bear remained by his side. Its heavy breathing was a comforting sound amidst the chaos of the wind. The night seemed to stretch on forever, but the bear's gentle nudges and the heat it provided kept James alive. In the depths of his near-freezing stupor, he realized that the bear wasn't just keeping him warm, it was protecting him, offering its strength and resilience in the face of an overwhelming storm. By the time the storm finally subsided and the first light of dawn began to break, the bear was already gone. It had disappeared as silently as it had arrived, leaving James with nothing but the memory of its warmth. But for James, that moment of shelter, an act of kindness from the wild, was enough. It had saved his life in ways he could never fully explain. After retiring from the army, James Walker found himself in a world that was starkly different from the one he had known during his military service. The chaos of the battlefield, the constant noise of commands and gunfire, and the sharp focus required for every mission were all gone. In their place was silence, a peace that, for most people, would be welcomed. But for James, that peace often felt heavy and unsettling. The memories of his time in service, both the good and the bad, floated in and out of his mind, like fleeting shadows. Some moments brought a sense of pride, others guilt, and some, like the day he met the bear, were both extraordinary and impossible to forget. Yet, despite all the years that had passed, he could never quite shake the vivid memory of that stormy night in the mountains when the giant bear had saved his life. James never spoke much about the encounter, at least not to anyone outside of his closest circle. He knew that the story sounded unbelievable to anyone who hadn't been there. How could a wild animal, a bear no less, choose to help him in his moment of need? It wasn't something that happened every day. People would look at him like he had lost his mind, and he wasn't sure he could convince anyone that it was real. Even as the years passed, the memory stayed with him, vivid and clear as if it had happened only yesterday. Every time the weather turned cold, or the winds howled through the trees, James's thoughts would drift back to that night. It was as if nature itself reminded him of the bear's warmth. He could still feel the heat from its massive body, the gentle pressure of the bear's nudge against his side, the way it had shielded him from the biting cold. He often found himself staring at the winter sky, wondering if the bear had ever returned to that same forest, or if it had wandered off into a different part of the wilderness. James knew he would never truly understand why the bear had helped him, but he felt a deep gratitude that he would carry with him forever. It wasn't just the physical warmth the bear provided that James often thought about. It was the comfort of knowing that, in his darkest moment, when he was on the brink of death, someone had cared. The bear didn't have to do what it did. It could have easily walked away, like so many others might have in that situation. But the fact that the bear had stayed with him, offering its protection in the midst of a storm, was something that James couldn't reconcile with the harsh world he knew. It was an act of kindness, A silent bond formed between man and beast, something that transcended the boundaries of understanding. Back in civilian life, James found himself often walking through the woods near his home, a peaceful rural area far from the life he had once known. The trees whispered in the wind, and the earth beneath his boots was solid and familiar. He would stroll for hours, reflecting on the life he had lived, on the friends he had lost, and on the second chance he had been given. But no matter where he walked, no matter how much time had passed, his mind always seemed to return to that night, that storm, and the bear. Sometimes he'd find himself sitting by a campfire, staring into the flickering flames, and wondering if he'd ever find the bear again. Could it still be out there, somewhere in the wilderness, alive and thriving? Or had the years changed it as much as they had changed him? James wasn't sure, but the thought of it never left him. It was as if a part of him was always searching for the creature that had saved his life, hoping for some kind of reunion, or even just a sign that the bear still remembered him. It was strange how life had a way of leaving certain things unresolved. There were plenty of things James had come to terms with: his time in the army, the losses he had suffered, and the friends he had made. But the bear, the mysterious creature that had saved him, was something that never fully fit into the narrative of his life. It was an enigma, an unanswered question that hovered in the back of his mind, always there, yet never fully understood. James knew that, in all likelihood, he would never find the bear again. But as he grew older, he also realized that the bear didn't need to be found. It had already done its part. The bear had shown him something that James had never fully understood in his years of service, a sense of kindness and compassion that transcended everything else. It had given him the strength to survive, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. That lesson, that bond, was something that James carried with him every day, and it was enough. He had been saved not just by the bear's warmth, but by the reminder that even in the wildest corners of the world, kindness could be found when it was needed the most. James had spent years wondering about the mysterious bear that had once saved his life. The memory of that freezing night in the snow-covered wilderness was etched in his mind. The warmth of the bear's fur, the steady rhythm of its breathing, the silent companionship that had kept him alive. It was a story he had told only a handful of people, and each time he questioned whether it had been a dream, a desperate illusion created by his mind in the face of death. But deep down, James knew the truth. The bear was real, and it had saved him. Years later, on an ordinary afternoon, James set out for a hike near his home, as he often did. The forest had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could think, reconnect with nature, and find peace. The sun was filtering through the towering trees, casting golden patches of light on the forest floor. The sound of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the gentle breeze created a soothing melody. As he navigated the familiar trails, his thoughts drifted, lost in memories of his past. His footsteps were steady, his breaths even. He had walked these paths countless times, but today, something felt different. An unusual stillness settled over the woods, and a strange, almost electric energy filled the air. James slowed his pace, scanning the trees, his senses sharpening. And then he saw it. Not far ahead, near a clearing, stood a massive brown bear. James froze. His heartbeat quickened. He knew better than to panic, but his body tensed instinctively. The bear was enormous, its thick fur catching the sunlight, making it appear even more imposing. It was standing still, watching him. James took a slow, careful breath. He had encountered wildlife before, but there was something eerily familiar about this bear. He studied its face, its posture. Then, as the bear shifted slightly, James felt his breath hitch in his throat. The eyes. Those deep, knowing eyes. Recognition struck him like a lightning bolt. It couldn't be. Could it? James took an uncertain step forward, his mind racing. The bear tilted its head slightly, a gesture so familiar that it sent chills down his spine. It was the same way it had looked at him that fateful night, the same quiet intelligence, the same gentleness beneath its powerful form. His heart pounded as he whispered, almost to himself, "It's you." The bear let out a slow, measured breath, watching him with a calm presence. It didn't move to attack, nor did it retreat. Instead, it simply stood there, its gaze steady, as if it, too, recognized him. James felt something stir deep within him, a profound sense of connection, of gratitude. He had spent years wondering if he would ever see that bear again, if he would ever have the chance to acknowledge the debt he owed. Now, standing in front of the very creature that had once saved his life, he understood something beyond words. Some bonds are not meant to be explained. Some souls, no matter how different, are destined to cross paths more than once. James took a step back, offering the bear the space it deserved. He didn't need to get closer. He didn't need to touch it or disturb its world. Just seeing it again was enough. After a long moment, the bear gave a final glance, then turned and lumbered away into the forest, disappearing into the trees. James stood there for a long time, the echo of their silent reunion lingering in his heart. He smiled. He would never forget. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, James's thoughts about the bear never truly left him. The quiet, peaceful life he had built in his retirement was filled with moments of reflection, and his mind often wandered back to the one night that had shaped his entire outlook on life. The bear had saved him when he was lost and near death in the wilderness. It wasn't just the warmth it had provided, or the shelter it had offered from the storm, but something far more profound. The bond that had formed in that moment of pure survival. Even in the solitude of his country home, James couldn't help but feel that the connection they had shared was still alive in his heart. One crisp autumn day, James decided to take a hike in the same forest where he had been rescued so many years ago. He had made the journey a few times before, each time hoping, yet never truly expecting, to cross paths with the bear again. He knew the chances were slim, but there was always a spark of hope inside him. After all, the bear had never been just a wild animal to him. It was a living symbol of survival, kindness, and an unexpected friendship forged in the most unlikely of places. This time, however, as James walked deeper into the woods, the air felt different. It was as if the trees whispered a familiar message. The forest seemed more alive than ever before. The wind, the leaves, and even the distant sounds of the wildlife around him seemed to carry an unspoken promise. Without realizing it, James walked further than he had intended. His footsteps became lighter, and the world around him felt strangely peaceful, almost as if nature itself were guiding him. Suddenly, through the trees, a movement caught his eye. His heart skipped a beat. Standing just a few yards away was the very same bear. It was larger now, its fur more mature, its eyes wiser and filled with a sense of knowing. But there was no aggression, no fear, only a quiet recognition, as if the bear had been waiting for this moment too. The world seemed to pause as James and the bear locked eyes, their gaze holding a deep understanding that words could never convey. It was as if time had stood still, and the years between them had vanished in the blink of an eye. James took a few tentative steps forward, his heart racing. He knew this wasn't a dream. The bear was real, and it was here, in front of him, just as it had been all those years ago. As he drew closer, the bear lowered its massive head in a subtle gesture of greeting. It was not a display of dominance, but an offering of trust, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had shared in the past. Without thinking, James knelt down in front of the bear. The cold of the forest floor seeped through his clothes, but he hardly noticed. All that mattered was the connection between them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The bear stood silently, and James remained crouched, his hand resting on his knee, feeling the weight of the years and the incredible journey they had both been on since their first encounter. Then, with a gentle, almost reverent nudge, the bear touched its nose to James's shoulder. It was a simple act, yet it held a world of meaning. The bear had saved his life once, and now, in this quiet moment, it seemed to be offering something even more powerful. A reminder that true bonds are never broken, not by time, not by distance, and certainly not by the struggles of life. Tears welled in James's eyes as he slowly stood, his heart full of gratitude and awe. He had never expected this moment, never imagined that after all these years, the bear would remember him. Or perhaps it wasn't about memory at all. Perhaps it was simply that the bond between them, forged in survival and kindness, had never truly faded. It had been there all along, waiting for the right time to surface again. As the bear took a step back, its large body moving gracefully through the trees, James remained rooted to the spot. He felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. The bear hadn't just been a lifesaver in that storm. It had been a friend. And in this moment, James understood something profound. True gratitude and friendship aren't dependent on time or circumstance. They don't fade with the years, nor are they diminished by distance. When a bond is built on trust and mutual respect, it stands the test of time. As the bear disappeared into the woods, James stood still, watching the spot where it had been. He knew that he might never see the bear again, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had shared a moment of deep connection that transcended the physical world and entered the realm of something far more meaningful. The bear had not just saved his life, it had given him something he could carry with him forever, an unspoken reminder that kindness, even from the wild, can change everything, and that true friendships, no matter how unlikely, never fade.